You know that highly specific, universally awful feeling? Like, picture this. You are sitting in a room. Maybe it's a super high-stakes project update at work, or, I don't know, maybe it's just a dinner party.
Right, yeah.
And the wine is flowing, the banter is incredibly fast, and the conversation is just kind of flying around you. And you are sitting there, and you understand absolutely everything.
Every single word.
Exactly. You hear the idioms, you catch the really subtle jokes. Your brain is just processing the grammar flawlessly. Like if someone handed you a transcript of this exact conversation and asked you to pass a written comprehension test on it, you would score 100%, no question.
Oh, for sure. You'd ace it.
But then the absolute worst thing imaginable happens. The room goes quiet. A question is directed at you. It is your turn to speak. And suddenly, your throat just tightens up.
Oh, yeah. The panic sets in.
Your heart rate spikes.
Yeah.
Your brain, which was just operating at this, genius level of comprehension, just completely freezes.
Mm-hmm.
So you either sit there in this agonizing silence, or you manage to mumble something so syntactically basic, so utterly devoid of nuance, that it completely betrays how much you actually know.
It's the worst.
It really is. You have this massive, complex toolbox of language sitting right in front of you, but the literal moment you reach for it, the lid snaps shut and the lock jams.
Yeah, it's a profound disconnect. And honestly, it's one of the most agonizing experiences for an advanced learner. You're essentially trapped in this cognitive bottleneck.
Right.
The gap between your passive comprehension, like what you can effortlessly consume, and your active production in that high-pressure split-second moment, it just feels vast.
It feels like an ocean.
Exactly. And it's an incredibly isolating feeling because, from the outside, the native speakers in the room, they have no idea. There's a sophisticated, highly articulate person trapped inside this suddenly malfunctioning verbal mechanism.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is, quite frankly, throwing the grammar books out the window. We are putting away the vocabulary flashcard.
Done with them.
Yeah. If you are listening to this right now, you are likely someone who has already put in the grueling hours. You understand verb conjugations. You know the mechanics. The issue you are facing now isn't really linguistic at all, is it?
Not even a little bit. It is entirely psychological.
Right. So today, our mission is to master the inner game of fluency. We're going to figure out how to bridge that devastating gap between knowing the language on paper and actually deploying it when the pressure is on in real life.
Because that inner game is where the true battle is fought once you hit that C1 or C2 level of proficiency.
Yeah.
The obstacles, they are no longer about memorizing past participles. They are about emotional regulation, cognitive resilience under stress, and, managing the psychological friction that comes with operating this advanced piece of mental software in real time.
And we are relying on some truly brilliant source material today for this. We're looking at a comprehensive transcript from an advanced language practice session created by the educators at PodZone.
They do incredible work.
They really do. They specialize in pushing learners past this exact plateau, right? Moving from textbook proficiency to authentic in the wild fluency. And what's fascinating about their approach is that they don't treat this psychological barrier as a side effect. They treat it as the main event.
Yeah, they tackle it head on.
Exactly. They start by pulling the rug out from under this assumption we basically all have, which is that getting better at a language inherently makes you feel more confident.
Right, which sounds logical, but
it's not. They describe this phenomenon called language imposter syndrome. So when you transition from being a solid intermediate learner to an advanced learner, your confidence doesn't smoothly arc upward like you'd expect.
Oh no, often it absolutely tanks.
It tanks. You hit a point where the more vocabulary you acquire and the better your syntax gets, the worse you actually feel about your ability to communicate.
It completely defies basic logic, doesn't it?
Totally.
I mean, if you possess more tools, you should feel more capable of building the house. But psychology rarely follows linear logic. When you are operating in that advanced tier, you are no longer in a classroom environment where the standard of success is just, mere comprehensibility.
Right. Did they understand my basic sentence?
Exactly. You are in rooms with native speakers now. You understand their nuance perfectly, which means you are suddenly hyper-aware of the nuance you are failing to produce yourself.
That is such a huge point.
You become paralyzed by the realization that your contribution might be grammatically correct, sure, but it's lacking the perfect colloquial rhythm or the precise cultural weight of the person who spoke right before you.
It feels incredibly similar to exploring the map in a massive open-world video game.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Right. Because when you first start the game, you spawn in this tiny, contained tutorial village. The map is incredibly small. The stakes are completely non-existent. You walk up to a non-player character, and you figure out how to say the equivalent of, "Where is the library?" Or, "I would like a coffee."
And it's terrifying at first, but
when they understand you, your brain just gives you this massive dopamine hit. Any successful communication is a total victory. The world feels completely conquerable because the borders of your known universe are so tight.
And in that tutorial village, the expectations from native speakers are equally low.
Right.
They hear your accent, they recognize your limited vocabulary, and they automatically adjust their standard. They are just thrilled you're trying, honestly.
They really are.
If you manage to convey your fundamental need, like if you get the coffee or find the library, both you and the native speaker consider the interaction a resounding success. The bridge you built across the communication gap might be made of duct tape and cardboard, but you both got across, so everyone is happy.
But then you level up. You hit C1. The game suddenly zooms the map out. You leave the tutorial village and the fog clears, and you realize, oh my God, there are entire continents I haven't explored.
Yes, massive oceans.
Massive oceans. There are complex, shifting political alliances and nuanced economic systems in this world. You suddenly realize that building a cardboard bridge just isn't enough anymore.
Not at all.
You are standing next to native speakers who are building structurally flawless, architecturally stunning suspension bridges, and they are doing it effortlessly. And because you now have the vocabulary to recognize their brilliance, you become acutely, painfully aware of how far you still have to go.
It's a heavy realization.
It really is. The sheer scale of the language you don't yet master starts to crush the confidence you built when you were just asking for coffee.
The psychological weight of that zoomed-out map is staggering. You are no longer measuring yourself against the baseline of "can I be understood?" You are measuring yourself against a lifetime of cultural immersion that the native speaker possesses.
Wow, yeah. A lifetime.
Yeah. And so the expectations you place on yourself become punishingly high.
Right.
You don't just want to participate in the dinner party anymore. You want to be witty.
Yes.
You want to be charismatic. And the fear of falling short of that newly elevated standard is exactly what causes the throat to tighten and the brain to freeze when it's your turn to speak.
So we have this crushing weight of expectations. But here is where things get complicated for me, looking at the pod zone material. They suggest that in these moments of high anxiety, when we feel that imposter syndrome flaring up, we should actively vocalize our struggle.
Yes, they do.
They provide these very deliberate phrases to use when you are stuck. But, okay, if I am in a boardroom, right, and I am pitching a strategy to a table of native-speaking executives, the absolute last thing I want to do is draw attention to the fact that I am struggling.
Sure, it feels counterintuitive.
Right. Doesn't acknowledging the bottleneck out loud just shatter the illusion of confidence? Doesn't it scream to the room, hey, everyone, just a quick reminder, I'm not a native speaker and I'm currently failing to find my words?
I mean, it is the most natural defensive instinct in the world to want to hide the struggle. We are conditioned to believe that competence requires seamless execution. Always.
Exactly. Never let them see you sweat.
But the strategy here involves a profound paradigm shift. When you are at an advanced level, attempting to mask your hesitation usually results in either a terrified deer-in-the-headlights silence,
which is awful,
or a rushed, chaotic jumble of filler words. Both of those reactions broadcast panic. They broadcast a lack of control. By actively vocalizing the pause, you aren't broadcasting weakness. You are broadcasting supreme deliberate control. You are seizing the reins of the conversation.
Okay, so it's about overriding the panic response with a sort of manufactured executive presence.
Yeah.
We need something that sounds less like I am lost and more like I am calculating.
Exactly. Look at the specific phrases they suggest in the transcript. Instead of freezing, you say, "To be honest, I'm finding it a bit challenging to articulate my thoughts on this."
Oh, that specific word choice, articulate, that does an immense amount of heavy lifting there.
It really does.
If you say, I don't know how to say this, you sound like a beginner. But if you say, I am finding it challenging to articulate my thoughts, you sound like an academic or a seasoned executive who is wrestling with a concept so profoundly complex that standard language is just insufficient.
Right. You are signaling to the room that the difficulty is not with your English. The difficulty is with the massive weight of the idea you are trying to convey.
That is so smart.
You are managing their expectations while simultaneously proving your advanced vocabulary. You buy yourself the critical seconds needed for your cognitive bottleneck to clear, and you do it without sacrificing an ounce of authority.
They mentioned another one, the source. Let me take a moment to gather my thoughts.
Yeah.
That one is fascinating to me because it implies permission.
Yes.
It is basically a polite command to the room. It says, the conversation is going to pause right now because I have decided it needs to pause.
Yes.
It takes the power back from the overwhelming pace of the native speakers.
It completely changes the power dynamic of the silence. An unannounced silence is terrifying, but a commanded silence, that is powerful.
Definitely.
And there is a third phrase they highlight that operates on an even deeper psychological level, which is, I feel like I'm not expressing this as clearly as I'd like to.
Right. That one is essentially a humble brag disguised as a struggle.
It really is.
Because if I say, I'm not expressing this as clearly as I'd like to, the unspoken second half of that sentence is, because my personal standards for clarity and precision are incredibly high.
Exactly.
It tells the listener that whatever clumsy sentence just came out of my mouth does not represent my actual capability, so they shouldn't judge my intellect based on it.
You are reframing your own hesitation. You are turning a perceived lack of linguistic ability into a demonstrated surplus of professional care. You care so deeply about ensuring the native speakers understand this crucial point that you are willing to hit the brakes on the conversation to recalibrate. It fundamentally neutralizes the imposter syndrome. You stop draining your mental energy, trying to hide the fact that you are engaging in high-level, real-time translation, and you just start managing that process out in the open.
So if you are listening to this right now, I really want you to mentally map out your week. Where is the specific environment that triggers your language imposter syndrome?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the weekly cross-departmental meeting? Is it the casual Friday drinks where the slang gets way too thick?
It's different for everyone.
Pinpoint that environment, because the reality is the self-doubt isn't going to magically evaporate just because you memorized a new idiom. The goal is to build the capacity to speak through the doubt. It's about equipping yourself with the armor of these control phrases so that when the panic hits, you have an automated, authoritative response ready to deploy.
And mastering that internal control mechanism is absolutely vital because it acts as the gateway to the next phase of the inner game. Once you successfully manage the internal dread, once you deploy a phrase like, let me gather my thoughts, and you actually begin to speak, you are going to inevitably collide with the external, messy reality of communication.
Right, because you can't stall forever.
No, you eventually have to talk. And when you do, you are going to make a mistake. So we have to transition from surviving the internal fear of speaking to managing the external friction of execution.
The friction of execution. The mistake. Now, what's really interesting is that the nature of mistakes changes completely as you level up.
Oh, completely.
When you are a beginner, a mistake is highly visible and it's structural. You use the past tense instead of the future tense. You put the adjective in the wrong place. But when you reach C1 or C2, those structural errors are mostly gone. The terror shifts to a much more insidious type of mistake, which is the slight, almost imperceptible unnaturalness in word choice.
It's the realm of micro errors. You construct a sentence that is grammatically flawless, technically accurate according to every dictionary on earth, and yet it is completely wrong.
Yes.
You might choose a synonym that carries a slightly different emotional resonance or a word that is typically only used in formal writing, and you just drop it casually into a conversation about weekend plans.
And the physical reaction to making one of those micro errors is so intense. You use a slightly clunky word, and the native speaker across from you gives you this tiny microscopic flinch of confusion.
Just a little twitch of the eyebrow.
Exactly. Or maybe they subtly repeat the sentence back to you, swapping your clunky word for the natural one. And your immediate physiological response is a full-body cringe. Your stomach just drops. It feels like a massive, catastrophic failure of fluency. But according to the Pod Zone Deep Dive, this is where we have to fundamentally rewire our perception. We have to stop viewing these micro errors as failures and start treating them as highly localized, immensely valuable data.
Yes. Reframing mistakes as data is perhaps the most powerful cognitive shift an advanced learner can make. Let's actually break down why that cringe happens in the first place, biologically.
Okay, yeah.
On an evolutionary level, humans are hypersocial creatures. Our survival used to depend entirely on our standing within the tribe. So when you make a linguistic error and a native speaker gives you a confused look, your brain processes that not as a simple vocabulary mistake, but as a micro signal of social rejection.
Wow.
Your biology is literally screaming that you are failing to integrate with the tribe.
So the cringe isn't just embarrassment, it's a deeply rooted survival reflex flaring up over a misplaced idiom.
Precisely.
That explains why it feels so disproportionately awful. But if we know it's just a biological false alarm, we can override it intellectually. We have to adopt the mindset of a scientist in a laboratory.
That is a great way to put it. If a chemist mixes a new compound and the beaker suddenly turns green instead of blue, the chemist doesn't collapse on the floor, declare themselves a fraud, and just abandon their career.
Right, they don't say, I'm a terrible chemist.
No, they grab their clipboard, they look at the green liquid and say, fascinating. The theoretical model predicted blue, but the reality is green. Why? What variable did I miss? They log the data, adjust the formula, and run the next experiment.
So when you are out in the wild, operating in the fluid, totally unpredictable environment of a second language conversation, you are the chemist. The textbook was your theoretical model. But the textbook cannot account for the highly localized, constantly evolving slang of a specific office culture in London, or the regional idioms of a neighborhood in Chicago.
It's impossible for a book to capture that.
Right. So the only possible way to learn how the language actually breathes and functions in that specific ecosystem is to test your vocabulary against it and observe the reaction.
Exactly. When a native speaker offers a gentle correction, or when a joke falls flat because the rhythm of your word choice was slightly off, the environment is handing you the exact coordinates of where the textbook ends and real living language begins. They aren't rejecting you. They're giving you the precise data point you need to calibrate your internal algorithm.
I understand the theory of the clipboard. I really do. It makes perfect logical sense. But here's the practical friction for me. If I am the chemist, I can sit in my quiet laboratory for 3 hours analyzing why the liquid turned green. A conversation does not afford me that luxury.
No, it moves fast.
The conversation is a high-speed highway. If I slam on the brakes every single time I realize I used a slightly unnatural word, if I stop to internally log the data and analyze my error, the conversation dies. The flow is completely destroyed. How do we extract the data in real time without causing a multi-car pileup in the middle of a sentence?
This is the critical difference between internal processing and external presentation. The goal in the heat of a conversation is not flawless execution, nor is it immediate deep dive analysis. The goal is graceful recovery. You want to mentally flag the data point for later review, but externally, you need a mechanism to keep the momentum of the conversation moving forward smoothly. You need verbal shock absorbers.
Verbal shock absorbers. Okay, so if I am mid-sentence and I hear a clunky word come out of my mouth, I don't panic and I don't apologize. What is the maneuver?
You deploy a real-time editing phrase. The source material highlights one that is incredibly elegant in its simplicity, which is, actually, let me rephrase that.
It's brilliant because it completely normalizes the error. Native speakers self-edit mid-sentence constantly.
All the time.
Our thoughts outpace our mouths all the time. So by using that phrase, you aren't admitting a language deficit. You are just participating in the normal, messy process of human communication.
Exactly. It acts as an eraser without drawing attention to the mistake. Another highly effective pivot is, what I meant to say was, this one is particularly useful when you realize the word you chose might have conveyed the wrong tone or subtext.
Right, like if you accidentally sounded rude.
Yes. It smoothly overwrites the previous sentence. You are navigating the ship gracefully around the obstacle rather than crashing into it, stopping the engines, and assessing the hull damage while everyone watches you.
And what happens when the error isn't a wrong word, but a missing word? You know that feeling. You have the entire sentence constructed in your head. You are delivering it perfectly, and you get to the crucial noun, and it has just vanished.
The file is corrupted.
Yes. You are staring blankly at the person, trying to remember the word for, I don't know, a colander.
This is where the tactic of circumlocution becomes your best tool. Advanced learners often feel that if they can't find the exact precise word, they have somehow failed. But native speakers talk around missing words constantly. The suggested phrase here is a conversational invitation. You say, I can't think of the word, but it's the thing you use for, and then you simply describe the function, the shape, or the context of the object.
It's the thing you use for draining pasta.
Exactly.
What I love about that is how it instantly transforms a solitary moment of failure into a collaborative puzzle. You are pulling the listener into your thought process. You aren't struggling alone anymore. You have enlisted them to help you find the missing piece. And 9 times out of 10, they will happily jump in and say, ooh, a colander.
It actually builds rapport. It demonstrates vulnerability in a highly competent way. So for the listener navigating this right now, the next time you feel that awful sinking cringe because a word came out wrong, try to visualize that mental clipboard. Acknowledge the data point. Do not apologize for your English. Simply take a breath, engage your verbal shock absorber. Actually, let me rephrase that, and keep driving.
All right, so we've established a solid perimeter defense. We know how to manage our own internal panic, and we know how to gracefully patch over our own verbal mistakes. But now we have to venture into significantly darker, murkier waters.
The real challenge.
Oh, yeah. We are shifting from managing what we say to the incredibly complex art of decoding what others say, because the terrifying reality of advanced fluency is this. You can possess a flawless accent, deploy a staggering vocabulary, and speak with perfect grammatical precision and still completely, utterly fail to communicate.
It happens all the time.
Why? Because you missed the subtext.
Subtext is the invisible dark matter of the English language. In physics, dark matter makes up the vast majority of the universe's mass, but it is completely invisible to our instruments. We only know it exists because we can observe its gravitational pull on the stars and galaxies around it.
I love that comparison.
Subtext operates the exact same way. It is the unspoken meaning that exerts a massive gravitational pull on the literal words being spoken. And as the Pod Zone session makes abundantly clear, communication in the English-speaking world, particularly in British and North American corporate cultures, relies heavily on this invisible mass. It is very often about understanding what is deliberately not being said out loud.
This is the exact moment where direct translation becomes not just useless, but actively dangerous.
Yes, very dangerous.
If you are operating purely on dictionary definitions, you are going to misread the room so badly that it could impact your career. You can run a colleague's sentence through a mental translation app, get a perfectly logical output, and remain blissfully unaware that you have just been insulted, dismissed, or warned.
Because the literal words are often just a polite facade masking the actual structural meaning of the interaction. English-speaking cultures often place a massive premium on face-saving and conflict avoidance in professional settings.
So true.
Bluntness is frequently coded as aggression. Therefore, disagreement, rejection, or criticism must be heavily cloaked in diplomatic ambiguity.
Let's actually ground this in reality by heavily dissecting one of the classic examples they provided in the material, because this is a trap that almost every advanced learner falls into at least once. Imagine this scenario. You are in a high-stakes strategy meeting. You have been working on a new marketing initiative for weeks. You pitch the idea passionately to your department head. You finish your presentation, the room is quiet, and the department head looks at you and says, "That's an interesting point."
The chameleon phrase. That's an interesting point.
Right. If I am an advanced learner relying on my vast vocabulary, I immediately parse the word interesting. The dictionary definition of interesting is arousing curiosity or interest, holding or catching the attention. By every literal metric, this is a positive word. My initiative caught their attention. I have succeeded.
But if you operate on that literal assumption, you might walk out of that meeting, start allocating budget for the initiative, and be completely blindsided when the department head sends an email killing the project 2 hours later.
Which is devastating.
Because in the ecosystem of corporate subtext, that's an interesting point, is rarely a genuine expression of fascination.
So what does it actually mean?
It depends entirely on the invisible dark matter surrounding it, but it frequently serves as a polite deflector shield. It very often translates to, "I fundamentally disagree with your premise, but it would be socially awkward to dismantle your idea aggressively in front of the team. So I am acknowledging that you spoke without endorsing what you said."
Yeah, it's a verbal receipt. Like, I confirm I have received your words. End of transaction.
Exactly. Alternatively, it can mean, "Your idea is incredibly radical. I have never considered this angle, and I am slightly overwhelmed. I need time to process this new information privately before I commit to any kind of public opinion. So I will use a neutral placeholder phrase to end the conversation now."
Okay, let me pause and push back on this entirely, because honestly, this sounds like a nightmare.
It can be.
If a perfectly pleasant word like interesting can secretly mean, "I hate your idea," or "I am overwhelmed," how is a non-native speaker supposed to navigate this without descending into absolute paranoia? Like, if words are untethered from their definitions, aren't we just encouraging learners to constantly second-guess every single positive piece of feedback they receive?
That is a highly valid concern, and it's why mastering subtext requires a completely different cognitive toolkit. You cannot navigate this space by analyzing the dictionary definitions of the words. You have to shift your focus to the behavioral variables surrounding the words. You must engage in hyperactive listening.
Okay, so what are the variables we are scanning for?
First, you analyze the micro-intonations in tone. Was the phrase, "That's an interesting point," delivered with a rising, energetic cadence that genuinely suggests curiosity? Or was it delivered with a flat, downward-inflecting monotone that signals finality?
So tone is crucial.
Absolutely crucial. Second, you analyze the silence. Did they respond immediately, or was there a long, uncomfortable pause before they deployed the phrase? A delay often indicates they were searching for a polite way to mask a negative reaction.
And most importantly, I'm guessing the context that follows.
Precisely. If they say, "That's an interesting point," and then immediately pivot the conversation to an entirely different agenda item, the phrase was a polite dismissal. They closed the door. If they say it and then ask a follow-up question about the logistics of your idea, it was genuine curiosity. You have to read the room, not just the transcript.
Let's look at another classic deflection they mentioned in the source material. Well, think about it.
Oh, yes. In a transactional or negotiation context, I'll think about it, is the ultimate face-saving rejection. It removes the immediate friction of a hard no, allowing both parties to exit the conversation gracefully with the unspoken understanding that the proposal is basically dead in the water.
And then there is the phrase that should basically trigger an air raid siren in your head, which is, "with all due respect."
Yes, this is a fascinating piece of linguistic architecture. "With all due respect" is almost universally a harbinger of intense disagreement. It is the polite velvet glove wrapped around a sledgehammer.
I love that description.
The speaker is essentially saying, "I am about to say something that is going to challenge you deeply, perhaps even border on offensive, so I am preemptively applying a layer of verbal respect to cushion the blow."
It's fascinating how heavily English relies on these softening mechanisms. So let's go back to the boardroom scenario for a second. I pitch my idea. The department head says, "That's an interesting point," and the tone is completely ambiguous. I don't know if they are politely killing the project or if they're just processing it.
Right. You're stuck in the middle.
If I assume they hate it, and I get defensive, like, "Why don't you like it?" What? I might look incredibly insecure if they were actually just thinking. But if I assume they love it, and I start planning the rollout, I look utterly oblivious to social cues. I am trapped in the ambiguity. How do I force the subtext out into the open without being aggressive?
This is where you deploy the clarifying probe. You cannot attack the ambiguity because that violates the cultural rule of politeness. And you cannot ignore it because that leaves you flying blind. You have to gently compel the native speaker to translate their own subtext for you, using a phrase that is equally polite but strategically demanding.
So instead of asking, "What do you mean by that?" which sounds kind of confrontational,
You use the technique highlighted in the session. You respond with, "I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, though."
I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, though. Let's dissect why that is such a powerful countermove.
It is brilliant because it perfectly mirrors the polite ambiguity of the initial statement, while simultaneously boxing them into a corner. By starting with, "I'm curious," you are signaling complete openness and non-aggression, but functionally you are refusing to accept interesting as a final answer.
You're not letting them off the hook.
Exactly. You are politely forcing them to put actual substantive scaffolding behind their vague reaction.
It calls their bluff. Like, if they genuinely like the idea, but were just processing, asking for their perspective, invites them to start collaborating. They will say, "Well, I think the timeline is tight, but the core concept is strong."
Right.
But if they were using interesting as a polite shield to hide their dislike, you have just gently removed the shield. They can't just repeat, "It's interesting." They're forced to begin articulating their actual objections. Well, to be honest, I have some concerns about the budget.
Yeah.
You have successfully dragged the dark matter into the light, and you did it without breaking the rules of professional etiquette.
It is conversational judo. You use the momentum of their politeness to pull the truth out of them.
Okay, so if we take a step back, the toolkit we are building here is incredibly robust. We know how to reframe our imposter syndrome to buy time. We know how to use real-time shock absorbers to patch over our micro errors. We're now equipped to decode the invisible dark matter of corporate subtext. We are operating at peak efficiency. We are navigating the highest levels of the L2 environment. And then,
Catastrophe.
yes, catastrophe strikes. You are halfway through a brilliantly constructed, highly nuanced sentence. You are managing the room beautifully, and suddenly the neural pathway just collapses. The word is gone. The thought is gone. Your mind goes completely, utterly blank.
The dreaded mind blank. It is the great equalizer. It happens to everyone, regardless of proficiency. But the way an advanced L2 learner reacts to it is often what separates authentic fluency from perceived struggle.
We are moving from high-level strategic nuance straight back into the primal mud as survival mode here. Because when that blank happens, when the screen goes dark in front of an audience, the immediate, undeniable human instinct is pure, unadulterated panic.
And panic, as we discussed briefly before, is not just an emotion. It is a physiological cascade that actively prevents you from solving the problem. Let's look at the biology of a mind blank. When you are speaking and you suddenly lose your train of thought, the silence stretches out. In a social setting, particularly a high-stakes one, being stared at in silence triggers the amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain.
Right.
Your brain misinterprets the social pressure of the silence as a literal physical predator.
So the brain says, everyone is staring at me. I am about to be eaten by a tiger.
Exactly. And in response to that perceived threat, the amygdala floods the system with cortisol and effectively hijacks the prefrontal cortex, which is the exact part of the brain responsible for high-level language retrieval, complex thought organization, and logical reasoning.
Wait. So the biological response to forgetting a word actually locks the door to the dictionary. Like the panic itself prevents you from remembering the word.
Yes. The system locks down to prepare for fight or flight, shutting off non-essential functions like finding the perfect synonym for efficiency. And the external manifestation of this internal biological crisis is chaotic energy. The L2 learner, desperate to prove they are still participating in the conversation, fills the terrifying silence with a barrage of verbal flinches.
The panicked filler words, like
Right.
dip,
Exactly. These aren't intentional words. They are an acoustic panic response. And unfortunately, spraying ums and not ums into a boardroom completely undermines all the authoritative executive presence you built using your control phrases. It sounds erratic.
It makes me think of how we interact with technology. Let's say you are streaming a highly anticipated movie on your TV, and right in the middle of a crucial scene, the screen just goes pitch black and the audio cuts out. What is your immediate reaction?
You panic.
Right, you think it's broken. You assume the app crashed. You assume the Wi-Fi is down. You grab the remote and start mashing buttons. That black screen is what a panicked mind blank looks like to your conversational partner. They think your linguistic software just crashed. But if that same movie stops and the screen dims slightly and a sleek little circular loading wheel appears in the center, spinning gently, you don't panic. You don't mash the remote. You sit back and wait patiently. Why? Because the system is explicitly communicated. I haven't crashed. I am currently buffering a massive, high-quality packet of data. Please hold.
That analogy perfectly captures the strategic solution. You cannot prevent the mind blank, but you can entirely control how the buffering is perceived by the audience. The goal is to deploy what the source material calls thinking phrases. These phrases are your conversational loading wheels. They transform a moment of chaotic, panic silence into a moment of deliberate, intentional pause. They signal to the listener that the system is working perfectly, it's just pulling up a highly complex file.
We need to program a manual override for the amygdala hijack. Let's look at the specific loading wheels we can use. The first one they highlight is a classic. How can I put this?
Is an incredibly versatile tool. Let's analyze why it works. When you say this, you are completely masking the reality of the situation. The reality is that your mind is totally empty. But to the listener, the phrase implies the exact opposite. It implies that your mind is overflowing with so many different words, and the concept you are about to deliver is so profound and complex that you simply need a moment to select the most elegant, precise way to articulate it.
It's a brilliant misdirection. You elevate your own status. You sound like a philosopher carefully choosing their words, rather than someone who just forgot the word for spreadsheet.
Another excellent buffering phrase, particularly useful when you go blank immediately after someone asks you a question, is, "That's a good question, let me think for a second."
That one is highly functional because it operates on two levels. First, it plays to the ego of the person who asks the question. That's a good question. Validates their intellect. People love feeling like they asked something challenging. Second, it explicitly requests and grants itself permission for a delay. Let me think for a second. Formally announces that a pause is about to happen, completely neutralizing the awkwardness of the silence.
You have taken control of the rhythm of the conversation, and the final phrase they suggest leverages natural fluency to mask the blank. It's on the tip of my tongue.
I love this one because it uses an idiom to explain a failure of memory. By perfectly executing a natural colloquial English phrase in the exact moment of a mental block, you are subconsciously proving to the listener that your English is excellent. You are just experiencing a universal human brain glitch.
It reassures the listener of your competence while buying you the 3 or 4 seconds your prefrontal cortex needs to reboot and find the missing word.
So we have a very specific, actionable challenge for you, the listener, right now. Do not just passively agree with this concept. You need to build the muscle memory before the panic hits. Pick one of those 3 phrases. How can I put this? Oh, that's a good question. Let me think for a second. Or it's on the tip of my tongue. Choose the one that feels most natural in your mouth. Say it out loud right now, wherever you are listening to this. Make a conscious, deliberate decision that this specific phrase is going to be your default automated loading wheel. The next time the screen goes dark in your mind, do not mash the panic buttons with ums and atas. Deploy the loading wheel.
It is a small tactical adjustment, but it yields massive psychological dividends. By having an automated response ready, you prevent the amygdala hijack entirely, allowing your language skills to remain accessible. And truly, all of these tactics we have explored so far, managing the imposter syndrome, recovering from micro errors, decoding the dark matter of subtext, and surviving the mind blanks, these form an incredibly resilient defensive perimeter. But as we enter the final phase of this deep dive, we must pivot from defense to the ultimate offensive strategy. We have to address the most profound challenge of advanced fluency: how to actually be yourself in another language.
This is the absolute pinnacle of the mountain, isn't it? Developing your English persona. The Pod Zone transcript raises a point that I think strikes a deeply emotional chord with almost every advanced learner, which is the heartbreaking realization that your actual personality seems to shrink, shift, or flatten when you operate in your second language.
It is a widely documented phenomenon in linguistics. Learners frequently report feeling like a diluted, two-dimensional version of themselves. They might be the life of the party, deeply sarcastic or profoundly philosophical in their native language, but in English they feel reserved, literal, and slightly boring. The colorful spectrum of their personality is reduced to grayscale.
Why does that happen? Why do we feel like our soul is somehow trapped behind the language barrier, even when we have a vocabulary of 20,000 words?
Because the mechanisms we use to broadcast our core personality traits are not built on basic vocabulary. They're built on highly complex, split-second linguistic architecture. Think about sarcasm. Sarcasm is not a word you can memorize. Sarcasm is an architectural feat.
It really is.
It requires presenting a literal statement while simultaneously applying a very specific micro-intonation, a specific rhythm, and a shared cultural assumption, all to signal that the meaning is exactly the opposite of the words spoken.
Right. So if your native identity is built on being the quick-witted, sarcastic one in your friend group, but you don't possess the precise cultural timing or the intonation patterns required to execute sarcasm in English, that joke fails. People look at you confused, or worse, they take you literally.
Which is painful.
So to avoid the friction of a failed joke, you just stop trying to be funny. A huge pillar of your identity is suddenly locked away. As the source material so powerfully puts it, C2 fluency isn't just about ensuring your ideas are understood by others. It is about ensuring that you are understood.
That is a staggering realization. It means that endless vocabulary drills and grammar exercises will never, ever be enough to bring your true self into the language. But here's the critical question we have to answer. Is the integration of your personality something you just have to wait for? Is it a magical process that happens naturally if you live in London or New York for a decade? Or can we actively, purposefully build the bridge between our inner authentic self and our outer English output?
The consensus from the experts is definitive on this. Waiting for it to happen organically is a recipe for long-term frustration. You cannot passively wait for your personality to arrive in the new language. You have to actively construct the specific linguistic housing for it. They refer to this process as conscious practice.
Conscious practice, what does that actually look like on a Tuesday night when you are studying? How do you practice a personality trait?
It begins with a ruthless self-audit. You have to sit down and ask yourself the difficult question: what specific part of my authentic self feels missing or muted when I speak English? You have to identify the delta between your native persona and your L2 persona. Once you identify that missing pillar, whether it's humor, passion, empathy, or authority, you treat it as a specialized, self-directed curriculum.
Let's walk through a tangible example. Let's say I do that audit and I realize that in my native language, I am very funny. I use a lot of dry wit and observational humor. But in English, I sound like a literal serious robot. How do I build the bridge for humor?
If humor is the missing piece, your conscious practice involves studying the mechanics of English humor like an engineer studying a bridge. You don't just watch English stand-up comedians for entertainment, you dissect them. You pause the video and analyze the architecture of the joke. What was the premise? Where was the pivot? Notice the exact vocabulary they used in the punchline. Was it a colloquialism? Notice the pacing. Where did they pause? How did their pitch drop when delivering the sarcastic line?
You are reverse engineering the wit. You aren't just learning the words, you are learning the sheet music of the joke.
Exactly. You have to learn the melody of sarcasm in English, which sounds entirely different from the melody of sarcasm in Mandarin or Spanish. And this applies to every personality trait. If you are naturally a deeply passionate, emotionally driven person, but you feel cold and clinical in English, reading standard news articles won't help you. You must explicitly seek out the vocabulary of conviction. You need to consume impassioned speeches, deeply emotional memoirs, or intense debates. You have to actively hunt down the phrasing that vibrates at the same emotional frequency as your internal state.
It's a process of trying on different linguistic outfits, adjusting the tailoring, and seeing which ones actually fit the shape of your soul. You are curating a highly personalized, bespoke vocabulary that allows your true self to pass through the L2 filter intact.
And this brings us to the ultimate thesis of the Pod Zone educators, the final destination of this entire arduous journey. True, masterful fluency is achieved when you finally reach a state of flow. It is the moment when you stop thinking about the English language entirely and you just start thinking. The language ceases to be an obstacle you are wrestling with and simply becomes a shadow that naturally and effortlessly follows the contours of your thoughts.
You just start thinking and the language follows naturally. That is the absolute dream. It's what every learner is striving for. So let's synthesize the massive territory we have covered today. We started by dismantling the myth that advanced knowledge equals immediate confidence. We learned to confront language imposter syndrome, not by hiding it, but by managing it openly, using strategic phrases to command the pause and project executive presence.
We then rewired our biological response to mistakes. We transitioned from the primal fear of social rejection to the analytical mindset of a scientist, treating those inevitable, slightly clunky word choices as highly localized data points and deploying graceful shock absorbers to keep the momentum going.
We took a deep dive into the invisible dark matter of English communication. We learned that the literal definition of a word is often irrelevant compared to its subtext, and we developed the conversational judo required to politely force that hidden meaning out into the light. We figured out how to override the amygdala hijack of a sudden mind blank by using a conversational loading wheel.
And finally, we explored the profound, conscious architectural work required to translate not just your thoughts, but the very essence of your personality, your humor, your empathy, your fire, into a new linguistic framework, ensuring that the person speaking English is undeniably, authentically you.
When you lay it all out like that, it is an immense, staggering amount of cognitive work. It is exhausting, just summarizing it.
It is genuinely exhausting. But the value of mastering this inner game extends far beyond the borders of language acquisition. When you engage in this level of deep, conscious practice, you are doing profound psychological weightlifting. You're building a level of emotional resilience and cognitive flexibility that most people never achieve. You are developing an acute, hyper-awareness of how you present yourself to the world, and an intense empathy for reading the hidden emotional states of others. Mastering this psychological friction fundamentally changes how you connect with the entire human race, regardless of which language happens to be coming out of your mouth.
It truly does. It forces you to become a master communicator on a human level, period. And that brings us to the close of our deep dive today. But before you take off your headphones, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We opened this entire discussion by looking at that terrifying feeling of freezing up, of knowing all the grammar rules perfectly, but having the mental toolbox locked shut when the pressure is on. And we just established that the ultimate highest state of true fluency requires you to reach a point where you stop thinking about the mechanics of the language entirely, allowing your authentic personality to just flow through unobstructed.
That is the ultimate destination, yes.
So here's the paradox I want you to consider. If the final, highest state of mastery requires you to completely let go of conscious mechanical control, Is it possible that your intense, relentless perfectionist obsession with studying the language is eventually the very thing that is preventing you from actually mastering it?
A deeply uncomfortable yet necessary question to end on.